Hi, my name is Katie Bills-Tenney, and I teach at Bellbrook High School, which is southeast of Dayton. And this year, with my AP Language students, I wanted to show them how to improve their style as writers. And I figured the best way to do that was to give them specific techniques, writing structures that they could use to make their writing better. The first writing lesson I did with my students, I showed them all these interesting structures and techniques, but then when the students were asked to imitate them, they didn't have the professional writer's words in front of them. So I would say to do this lesson, it's best to have a paper with all the examples that are used in the presentation. You print out and you give to the students. That way they have it right there in front of them when you ask them to do imitation. The other thing I would say is ask students to write down definitions of the terms you're going to be seeing in this presentation and their imitations in their writer's notebook. Then they have those there to go back to later and use in future writing. So pull out your writer's notebook and follow along. Let's learn. Okay, students, you've walked in the classroom and this is on the projector screen today. You've been asked to inspire a group of blank to blank. What things would you talk about? List those in your notebook. So I'm doing this because for the writing that we're going to be doing later, we need to have some ideas down to pull from. That way we can launch right into the imitation. So in my example, I've been asked to inspire a group of Girl Scouts to sell more cookies. So things I know I need to talk about. I need to mention numbers, how many cookies we should be selling, all those delicious cookie flavors. That's probably fairly convincing. And I should let my audience know, my Girl Scouts know, how much people love their cookies. Some things that I saw students do when we did this project included things like convincing teachers to give less homework, or inspiring football players to try out for the musical, or inspiring their parents to get a puppy. So this is a lot of possibilities out there. Go ahead and pause this video for a minute or two so that you can write down your ideas in your notebook, share with one another. Make sure you have written down who you're going to inspire, what you want to inspire them to do, and a few ideas on evidences you would use for inspiration. Now that you have some ideas down, let's look at some examples. Why do these sentences sound so nice? Dawnland had evolved into something more attractive, an ecological crazy quilt of wet maple forests, shellfish-studded tidal estuaries, thick highland woods, mossy bogs full of cranberries and orchids, fractally complex snarls of sandbars and beachfront, and fire-swept stands of pitch pine that came from our reading this week. I have journeyed from the lands of spirit, drunk from the fountains of wisdom, rested beneath the trees of eternity, and to the land of my birth I have returned. Go ahead and write down some ideas in your writer's notebook about why you think these sentences sound nice. Especially notice patterns. Do you see a particular pattern in the way that the sentence is set up? Once you've written down some ideas, go ahead and turn to your neighbor and talk about this. And pause the video here so you have some time to talk. Now, go ahead and let's talk as a group. In the first example, did you notice all the list of different adjectives that were being used? We saw the ecological, crazy, and then it's followed up with a noun, quilt. Shellfish-studded, notice the use of the hyphen there because we're taking two words and putting them together to describe estuaries. Thick highland woods, oh wait, it's always adjective, adjective, noun. Oh, but it changed here, mossy bogs, but it's still adjective, noun, full of cranberries and orchids. Fractally complex snarls, so two adjectives, well, technically this is an adjective. So we have a list of things, but what about this one? I have journeyed, I have drunk, I have rested, I have returned. So we have a lot of patterns that are similar in a row. So does this have a name? Let's figure it out. And this does have a name. This is known as parallelism. It's a large umbrella of ideas, basically meaning you're using the same general structure for multiple parts of a sentence or for multiple sentences, and it links them all together. Parallelism gives writing cohesion. Cohesion means that things are sticking together. It keeps it balanced and very intentional because you're choosing the same pattern over and over again. It makes writing easier to read because it causes that flow and digest, and when we're listening to writing, like speeches, it makes it easier to listen to. So parallel structure is stylistically pleasing, it's natural feeling, and it's structurally supportive. Earlier, when you were talking to your partner, you should have talked about, because it's something we've been practicing, what's the effect? What does this seem to either emphasize or make us notice when we're reading these different examples? Let's look at some more examples. What do you notice here? He came in triumph and in defeat departs. He walked briskly along the seawall to catch the sunset and quickly realized that we were too late. And this famous quote from John F. Kennedy, "My fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." Go ahead and write down in your writer's notebook some ideas and pause this video to give yourself some time to notice and write. Now go ahead and talk to your neighbor about what you noticed. And let's bring this back to the group. Did you notice that we had a similar structure again, just like we saw in parallelism before? Here it says in triumph, in defeat. And I see came right here and departs right here. So it doesn't follow the exact same order, but it does have this verb, prepositional phrase, verb. So it seems to turn it around. Let's see if that continues in the next one. We walked, verb, briskly, adverb, along the seawall, prepositional phrase, to catch the sunset, and quickly realized, oh, we like turned it around again. We have an adverb verb, where here it was verb, adverb. And then in this example from John F. Kennedy, it says, ask not what your country can do for you, what you can do. So it switched it around. Does this have a name? Does anybody know? Of course it does. And of course it's some really great Greek term. It's known as chiasmus. Chiasmus means crisscross arrangement. So when I think of chiasmus, I think of the X. Basically, you invert the expected structure. It's an ornate form of parallelism. So rather than keep the structures exactly the same, this kind of brings them full circle and switches them around. It means the writer thinks a statement is worthy of closer inspection. In other words, it's a change. It's something different and a pattern that's been established. And so we usually go, ooh, that was interesting. You brought it back full circle to the beginning. Don't forget to write down this term in your writer's notebook. Now let's return to what you were doing earlier with your inspirational speech. We're going to attempt some of this parallelism. So look at those examples you have on your sheet in front of you. What I want you to do right now is write the first line, the opening for your inspirational speech, and the last line, the closing of your inspirational speech. Your opening is going to use parallelism, so you decide what types of structures you want to do right in a row, and your closing, you're going to do chiasmus. If you want, you could use that line from John F. Kennedy and you could replace it with your own words, but use him as your structure to imitate. Notice this little example I've got right here. To communicate is to speak, to pause, and to listen. To listen, to pause, and then to speak is communicate, to communicate well. So we've got parallelism here, to speak, to pause, to listen, and then it turns into chiasmus here because there it goes, swapping it around. Go ahead and pause the video right here so you have some time to write. Give yourself about 5 minutes. And once you've had a chance to write in your writer's notebook, turn to your neighbor and share some of your opening and closing lines with one another. One really great one I heard today, I noticed as I was walking around, was ask not what you would do for a puppy, ask what a puppy would do for you. So really convincing, great last line to use. Now, these next two examples you have there on your worksheet, so I want you to read them to yourself. And what do you notice seems to be the pattern happening in both of them? This first one from Winston Churchill, and this one from Martin Luther King Jr. As you're noticing this pattern and you're discussing it with your neighbor now, after you've written in your writer's notebook what you noticed, go ahead and talk to one another about what is the effect. First, Winston Churchill, then Martin Luther King Jr. We saw in both of these that there was this repetition of a phrase. So here in Martin Luther King, he says, with this faith, over and over again at the beginning of each phrase. With this faith, we will be able to. With this faith, we will be able to. With this faith, we will be able to. And then he builds and builds and builds to pray, to struggle, to go. So we've got that parallel structure continuing after this repeated opening phrase. Does this have a name? Of course it does. Now let's go ahead and write this term in your writer's notebook. This is anaphora. Ana means back, phora means to bear, so it's a carrying back. And basically what you do with anaphora is you repeat a word or phrase at the beginning of multiple clauses or sentences. And it usually is used to build a sense of climax by ordering phrases or clauses from least to most important. So let's go back and look at those examples from Winston Churchill and Martin Luther King Jr. and see, does it do that? Go ahead and pause the video right here and talk about that. Now, look at this example. What do you notice? What do you notice about in these examples from the famous writer Ralph Waldo Emerson, American transcendentalist, and another John F. Kennedy, JFK example here? What seems to be the pattern and what seems to be the effect of this pattern? Once you've written down some thoughts, turn to your neighbor and talk about it. And then let's talk as a whole group. Did you see things like the repetition of us here at the end? And then it says, no government is better than the men who compose it. I want the best. We need the best. We deserve the best. So we have repetition again, but this repetition now is at the end of the phrase. And does this have a name? Yes, it does. This is known as epistrophe, or some people call it epiphora, just like anaphora. Epi means upon, strophe means a turning, so it's a turning about. Basically, all you're doing is you're ending each clause with the same word or phrase, thus emphasizing that word or phrase. So it almost becomes like a punctuation mark. Both anaphora and epistrophe are a way for an author to plant flags, for them to point out things they want you to note. Don't forget to write down these terms in your writer's notebook, and we have one more that we're going to look at today. Now, what do you notice in this example? It's often attributed to another famous American, Benjamin Franklin. Go ahead and write down in your writer's notebook what you're noticing and what seems to be the effect this time. After you've written in your notebook, turn to your neighbor and talk about it. Remember, you can be pausing the video at different points here to go ahead and follow along with us. And now let's talk as a group. Did you see that we have this for want at the beginning, and then we have a was lost at the end? Now we have things being repeated at the beginning, at the end, but the middles are all different. The name of this technique is simplice. Sim means enter and ploque means twine, so you're interweaving. You're combining anaphora and epistrophe patterns, and it can create this feeling of completion as well as emphasis. This is the point where we always talk about, do I like this, do I not, do I think I would use it, how do I think I would use it? That helps to establish for my students why writers make these choices and let them know that they don't have to make these choices, but we make choices as writers intentionally. Go ahead on back to your inspirational speech now. Let's write the middle. I want you to try to use all three forms of parallel repetition. All of these fall in that category of parallel repetition: anaphora, epistrophe, and simplice. your key here is your speech should not exceed 1 minute. So you've already written the beginning and the end. Now we're filling in the middle. And I've got a little example here to remind you of what those structures look like. Repeat the phrase for style, repeat the phrase for emphasis, repeat the phrase for clarity, but repeat the phrase. Go ahead and pause the video right here so that you can do some writing. Probably give yourself 5 to 10 minutes depending on your group. And then let's go ahead and talk about this process that we went through today. When I'm doing these writing lessons, I usually follow the same pattern. I show examples, I tell them to look for patterns in the examples, and they write ideas down in the notebook. From there, I always have students discuss with a partner before discussing as a whole class, mainly because I have such large classes, but also because students have told me in their reflections that they appreciate that time to talk with others because it really helps them process these ideas. From there, we learn the name and we talk about its effect, and then we usually try it out in the writer's notebook. This is my standard process over and over again. Model and imitate. And there's variations on it, but a constant phrase you'll hear in my classroom is, "What do you notice?" I did this entire lesson on a Friday, and then we came back on Monday, and my students had written in their writer's notebooks their little speeches, and we did this row by row challenge, which was kind of a fun way to do some sharing. They read their speeches to people in their row, and then they nominated someone who they felt was the most inspirational to share with the class, and then from there we pulled our favorites from the class, and then we compared that to people from my other class because I have 2 periods of AP language. Now, you could probably break this lesson down into multiple days if you wanted to, maybe just starting with that first part of the idea of parallelism, then maybe the next day doing chiasmus, then doing each day anaphora one day, epistrophe another day, simplicity another day. I just wanted to bring it all together on one day as one fun writing lesson, but it's definitely something that could be broken down over multiple days. So the big question is, why am I approaching writing this way? First, writers need experience. They need to hear other people's words, and from there, they need a chance to play. And the play comes in the imitation. So when we have these professional words in front of us, it gives us something to try out on our own, just like we see artists do, just like we see musicians do, and even sports athletes. They watch other people play and they try to imitate those movements. So this is writers imitating the movements of other writers. The other thing I think is really important is that students, they need to be taught. They need to be taught directly how to write, and these structures is something really concrete that they can grasp onto. Now, as far as what's next, what would they do next? This is a class in AP Language where they're going to be expected to do analysis of things like speeches and letters and other nonfiction. So they need to be able to see these examples in other places and discuss the effect on the piece. But as writers, I might ask them later to prove to me that they use these structures in their own writing, and I'll ask them to do specific things like we did in the speech. Use anaphora, use epistrophe, underline it, show it to me that you've used it, talk about why you decided to make that choice. I often have students write reflections of the choices they've made in a writing piece. Another really great way to use this after you've taught these structures is possibly pull it into revision. If you're doing revision stations, you can say, hey, find a point in your writing where you could do some anaphora and add it, or find a point where you could end with chiasmus. This is a great way to improve writing and give it a sense of style. Good writing uses parallelism and repetition intentionally. So I hope you enjoyed our lesson today, and please send me an email. My email is at the beginning of this video if you have any questions. Have a great day.